The First World War will always be remembered for its trenches, but plenty of fighting occurred even deeper down, in tunnels. Recently, a 300-metre tunnel dug by the Germans has been discovered near the village of Crayon. This tunnel is yet to be excavated, but I've been to see some of the tunnels built by the Allies that survive to this day. I've come to one of the best preserved First World War battlefields now. You can still see the shape of the Allied front line. And this fence is here to protect people because there's still a lot of unexploded First World War explosives right in there, so you can't walk across there now. But the reason I'm here is not to look at the battlefield on the surface, but to find out what went on below. Come to a place now which demonstrates just how far the war had moved on in the years since it had begun in 1914. These are the massive tunnels under Vimy Ridge, burrowed out of the chalk, which the Canadians used to score one of the most breathtaking victories of the war to that point. This is Vimy Ridge. It's one of the most prominent, massive features on this part of the Western Front. It's like there's miles of flat farmland, and then this huge ridge rises up out of it like a wave breaking. The Germans had very, very strong positions on top of that ridge, and it was the Canadians' job to get them off it. If you want a job done properly, you've got to ask the Canadians in this life. And the Canadians took this approach that would change the way the British attacked on the Western Front. They managed something that previously hadn't really been done before, which was a very quick, very successful attack which comprehensively drove the Germans back. They did so by tunnelling through this stuff. They used the fact that Vimy is built on chalk, porous but quite stable chalk, so you could tunnel deep into this ridge line. You could create communication trenches, you could bring the supplies forward that were required to launch a big assault like this, and perhaps most importantly of all, you could burrow deep under German lines, lay around about 13 massive mines under those German lines that would all be detonated at one particular point. And they detonated those mines on the morning of April the 9th, 1917. It was Easter Monday, they were meant to go the day before, Easter Sunday, but there'd been a terrible snowstorm. So the ground was still thick with snow. They detonated these mines, giant explosions, and all these tunnels were packed with infantrymen that were as close as possible to German lines, and when the mines blew up, they were able to jump out, make only the short distance across no man's land, and take those objectives. They were then able to beat off any German counterattacks. It was a limited, well-rehearsed, perfectly planned operation, and it contained the seeds of all future successes against the Germans. But look at this warren of tunnels down here. Right, which way should we go? These tunnels were excavated by Welsh miners because they were the best miners in the world at the time. They were experienced digging through chalk. And they could do about 6 meters a day. And there are 10 kilometers of tunnels down here. That just gives you a sense of the scale of the preparation, the scale of the effort required to break through these German positions. This was an operation years in the making, but it was an operation so successful that the German High Command had to completely reassess the way that they were going to defend against British and Commonwealth troops who were gaining in confidence, gaining in expertise with every passing month of the war. Crawl space there. Sometimes they didn't need to build tunnels big enough for infantry battalions to go through, so only the miners would need to just crawl from one tunnel to the next. Terrifying. It's hard to, there's many jobs in World War I that were appalling, but I think living and operating here in these underground spaces was pretty bad. Don't forget, the Germans they had their own sappers, their own miners. They knew that the Allies were trying to do this, and so there were mines, counter mines, attempts to collapse each other's tunnels, and very occasionally 2 tunnels would meet and then be brutal, medieval hand-to-hand fighting in pitch blackness down here as two desperate groups of young men fought for their lives. Even though the 9th of April goes down as one of the most successful days in the Allied war effort to that point, it's still worth remembering that around about 2,400 Canadians lost their lives in that one day. It's the single bloodiest day in the history of Canada. But the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Canadian Divisions did achieve most of their objectives by the morning. That short dash across no man's land, thanks to these tunnels, really paying off. But the 4th Division struggled. So there were lessons to learn, and they still did not have the ability to completely and decisively break through German lines. That would take more months of brutal warfare. I've come to the town of Arras, and I'm now going 20 metres underground to look at something truly remarkable, even by Western Front standards. These vast caverns are actually man-made. They're quarries. They were mined by quarrymen in the 17th and 18th century for the limestone to build the magnificent buildings of Arras, which sits above me now. When the British took over this part of the front line at the beginning of 1916, they realised that these huge ancient quarries would be the perfect bunkers, basically, underground hideouts for the men in the army, sparing them the brutal, destructive fire of the Germans, which was laying waste to the whole city of Arras above. Remarkably, the town, the people of Arras, sort of forgot about these quarries. They were used during the Second World War as air raid shelters, and then they were locked up. And because it was the British Army that ran this place during the war, the town people didn't really have much of a connection with it. The townsfolk had been largely evacuated. And they were discovered in the 1990s by the Arras archaeologist, and it's then been turned into a beautiful, high-tech visitor attraction, museum, and it's well worth a visit. It's only been open a few years. Sometimes I think nothing connects you with the lives of those men in the First World War, like the graffiti they left behind. It's so personal, it's so humorous, and it's in the strangest places. We come into one of the caverns now, and this is a New Zealand tunneler. You can see the nose there, eye there, big chin there, big chin, big nose. I like this guy. He's obviously related to me. And then he's wearing this iconic New Zealand hat. It was known as a lemon squeezer. It's called the Wellington Tunnels, not because, well, not directly because of the Iron Duke, who would have marched near here after his victory at Waterloo, but because a huge amount of the tunnelling here was done by New Zealand tunnellers. And they gave each cave system and area names corresponding to cities in New Zealand. So we've got Wellington here, we've got Auckland further north, and then we've got other New Zealand cities further south as well. So that's what gives this place its underground geography. It was capable at its peak of holding around 25,000 troops down here. It was a vast underground city. That, in fact, was the pre-war population of Arras. And at times, this would have been crammed with men, sheltering from German bombardment or preparing for an offensive. 20 kilometres worth of tunnels were dug. There are so many little pieces of evidence taking us back to the time of the First World War. The black writing here, to the latrine, of course very important if you've got that many men down here. Maintenance of health and hygiene, vitally important. So everyone had to know exactly where to go to the toilet. Very useful to know. Easy to get lost down here, so lots of numbers on these pillars. And then, I like these. These are the burn marks from the candles that were placed on the little ledge there. So there would have been some electricity down here, but a lot of it was lit by candlelight. It would have been eerie. Imagine lit by candles, the thump and shudder of heavy artillery hitting above. It would have felt both quite comforting down here, but also pretty alien and probably quite scary for lots of people. So this is a First World War tunnel leading from one big quarry to other quarries. These ones are called Nelson and Blenheim. The reason they're called that is because they are cities in New Zealand that are south of Wellington, which this is the Wellington Quarry. It's a bit ironic that these quarries are all named after famous moments, largely in Anglo-French history, like Admiral Nelson and the Battle of Blenheim, even though, of course, we're now in France, allied to the French by 1916. One thing they've found plenty of down here is picks. Lots and lots of the heads of pickaxes. Those were the vital tool. It was all done by hand. It said the New Zealand tunnellers could dig about 60 metres a day down here. It's impressive. I like the way they've recreated the audio down here. It gives a very eerie sense of what it must have been like when it was stuffed full of British and Commonwealth troops. You've got reconstructed bunks here, so they've been stacked in like sardines, and as well as objects found on the battlefield from 100 years ago. So the quarries, the big cavernous spaces, are from the 17th century. But these linking tunnels were dug during the First World War, both by Brits, but also notably by New Zealand tunnellers. And together they joined up all of these quarries into one vast underground city. And this is very exciting, this bit here. This bit is not open to the public, so it's almost like the soldiers have just left. Still lots of detritus from the war. Although it feels pretty secure and solid down here, there's evidence now of a pretty significant collapse. And even though these tunnels were deep underground, obviously the constant bombardment this area received did weaken some of these structures. Some amazing graffiti here. This says it all, really. A sapper, which is a military word for a miner or tunneler. T. Collins, there's his number. The date, 26th of the 2nd, 1917, I think. And NZ, New Zealand Engineers Tunnelling Company. This is one of the legendary New Zealand tunnellers that was down here. Definitely left his mark. One thing I like about being down these tunnels is you can't get lost, because the good old British Army made sure everyone knew where everyone was at all times. To Blenheim, Arrow. So we're going to the Blenheim Quarry next. So you can see these electricity cables up here. These are actually from the Second World War, when it was a shelter for French civilians. But there would have been cables here during the British period, but they were removed when the front line rolled forward. The British stripped these tunnels and took nearly everything with them, except their old tin cans. Mess tins, ammo cases, all the detritus that accompanied the armies of the Western Front. And you think of the millions of tons of supplies required to keep this army here in France and Belgium. Right, where are we going? Entrenching tools. Look at this. Boots. Can you imagine how exciting it must have been being the Arras regional archaeologist in the 1990s and uncovering these tunnels that have been lost to history? I mean, they say being an archaeologist isn't like being Indiana Jones, but I think on this occasion they might be wrong. Whoa, look at this. Okay, and I see a sign to Blenheim through here. Here we go. Entrance to Blenheim. With the Second World War markers everywhere. Now this was a tunnel dug by the New Zealand tunnellers, another small little tunnel, mined out, which joined a big quarry to this next quarry. So that was Nelson Quarry. Let's see what Blenheim's got to offer. It's amazing to think that these tunnels still run under Arras today. how much of the legacy of the First War is still hidden from most of us as we go about our daily lives. But it's still lurking there. And then we got all sorts of graffiti here. It's remarkable. Look at this one. KSLI, King Shropshire Light Infantry. That's good. Oh, it's good to see light infantrymen down here. My great-grandfather was in the Somerset Light Infantry. Wow. Look at this. Just the different numbers of cultures and languages and ethnic groups in the mighty British Empire at the time, where it stretched from the Pacific Islands to northern Canada, India. They had all been down here jostling alongside each other, fighting for the King Emperor. Weird. Some pictures of women here by the looks of things. Maybe a sweetheart. That's a beautiful one there. Somebody's sweetheart. Or a pin-up. This looks a lot like Charlie Chaplin. I think the graffiti sometimes can take you closer to these men who are now dead 100 years since than almost anything else. Welcome to the History Hit YouTube channel, which we are relaunching. We've got all the best exclusive content going straight onto this History Hit YouTube channel. And you can find out, for example, why on earth I'm standing at the top of this mast. You should probably subscribe.